I'm joined today by Bill Scher. He is senior writer at Campaign for America's Future and contributing editor at Politico. Bill, we've sort of been trying to figure out what we can deduce from the information we have today about the November election. We have some polling which compares nationally Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but of course, the election, as it typically does, will come down to the results in some very specific swing states, which admittedly might be a longer list this particular election than it has in the past, but maybe not. Although I did go back and look at what the national polling difference was in 2008, as well as in 2012 and in 2004. And the June national polling actually did happen to correlate with who ultimately won in November. So let's start there. I mean, does national polling today serve as a predictor of any kind?
I mean, it's not a airtight predictor. We certainly have examples where June polling did not bear out in the general. Mike Dukakis was up before his convention and was up by a lot more after his convention, and that all dissipated by the fall. You know, in May of 1992, Bill Clinton was in third place behind Ross Perot and George H.W. Bush. You know, Perot was in first place in some of those polls. And we hear this talk about how, you know, Hillary and Donald Trump are the least popular nominees in history. You know, Bill Clinton was in third place. It was under 30% at this time. But things happened in those circumstances to change things. You know, Ross Perot dropped out, and Bill Clinton, it had his Sister Soldier moment, and Mike Dukakis got hammered with Willie Horton in the tank, and didn't have a response strategy. You know, I think since those races, campaigns, professionally run campaigns, you know, which Donald Trump's campaign doesn't qualify as that right now, have learned that you really can set a lot of perception in this pre-convention summer period. You know, Barack Obama went to town on Mitt Romney in this period in 2012, and Hillary's doing the same to Donald Trump right now, and Donald Trump is barely responding in kind. So it's a little hard to see at this juncture what game changer might happen in the late summer, early fall, but there is historical precedent of such things happening.
I read a couple of analyses that looked at what the effect could be of terrorist and violent attacks on the election. And a lot of people think back to 2004, the re-election of George W. Bush, the bin Laden video. And the consensus that I've read is that as a general thing, terrorist and violent attacks from now until November are likely to help Trump more than Hillary Clinton, although not by as much as historically it's been assumed that they would help the Republican versus the Democrat. And this sort of a result of Donald Trump being a very unusual candidate with essentially no experience dealing with anything, and Hillary Clinton being perceived as a more sort of hawkish neoconservative Democratic candidate. Do you buy into that general analysis?
Well, I mean, there's always a presumption, and there's certainly precedent that terrorist attacks trigger nationalistic and militaristic impulses in the electorate. But to draw a line from that to say that means Trump will benefit and Clinton will not, you know, that's a much bigger leap, because their personas don't fall so neatly on the left-right spectrum when it comes to foreign policy. I wouldn't call her a neoconservative on foreign policy, but she's certainly not considered a pacifist. And she certainly offers a very resolute and confident persona when talking about foreign policy issues. So we have an example now. We have the Orlando massacre, which was carried out, according to the shooter, in the name of various terrorist groups, even though many of those terrorist groups, dislike one another. And Trump's response was very self-centered and not well thought out, and Hillary's was more traditional and predictable from what you expect a major party candidate to do. And the early polling we've seen since then has been in Hillary's favor. So I don't think it's a given that just because Trump is the most anti-Muslim candidate in the race necessarily means people are going to turn to him and say, I think you should be commander in chief in a time of crisis.
I've talked earlier this week about a couple of different interesting comments that have been made with regard to the certainty of Trump as the Republican nominee. We heard from Ron Johnson, who used the term uncertain about Donald Trump's nomination as the Republican nominee. Steve Lonigan from New Jersey claims that he has hundreds and hundreds of Republican delegates who are at least speaking to him about a possible delegate revolt at the convention. Any reason to think any of this stuff is valid, reasonable, could have an impact, or is this basically not worth paying attention to?
Well, I'd pay attention. I'm skeptical they can get a majority of delegates to actually deny him the nomination. It would be an extremely audacious move, and everything coming out of the Republican Party is cowardly in the face of Donald Trump. They have not wanted to confront him head on and say, your racism, your bigotry does not belong in our party. They seem to mainly follow the John Boehner model of how do you deal with unruly elements in your base, which is have at it, go walk off the cliff, run into the brick wall. At least when it happens, it'll be your fault and not my fault. I think they all think Trump's going to lose, but they want Trump to be blamed for it and not because of Republican establishment meddling. Now, having said that, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are not 1,237 Republican delegates. They come from all across the country. And we don't really know the mindset of each individual delegate. We know from reporting that there are, quote unquote, several hundred delegates organizing to stop Trump, which is far short of a majority, one would assume. But if Donald Trump is polling 10 points behind Clinton, if that's starting to drag down vulnerable Republican incumbent senators in Florida, in New Hampshire, in Ohio, then maybe you'd have the ingredients for a move at the convention floor to say all the delegates are unbound and it's a free-for-all. But I would still put the odds on that extremely low, because I still think their gut reaction is self-preservation, self-survival. If you're in elected office right now, you most likely still will be. There's only a handful of people that would get tossed out, and they want to be able to pick up the pieces when it's all over. And they think if they get blamed for the defeat, they won't be able to pick up the pieces.
My question on it, or around this entire movement, is sort of a practical one, and it's the same thing I thought of when I saw Mitt Romney say that, no, I'm just not supporting Trump. He shouldn't be running the country. He shouldn't be the Republican nominee, which is, what ultimately can you actually make happen at this point that won't just help Hillary Clinton get elected, which I can't imagine is the goal of the delegate, the people running the delegate revolt thing, or Mitt Romney? I mean, what exactly is their impetus for doing this? If not, what plan do they have that doesn't just help Hillary Clinton?
I think anyone who is either firmly never Trump or skeptical of Trump in the Republican establishment is already writing off 2016 as a loss. They don't see Trump winning. I think they are fully aware that if they did block Trump, that they would be dividing their own party, which would also mean Trump not winning, and Republicans not winning. Some of the most fantastical scenarios is you get a third party candidate in who can deny Hillary an electoral college majority, and it gets tossed into the House of Representatives to be determined by the Republican majority there. I think it's highly far-fetched, and I don't think most Republicans really believe that as a possibility. But maybe there are a few out there who have high hopes. I think, by and large, the question is, what's going to be good for the Republican Party post-Trump? How can we get rid of this cancer on our party as fast as possible? Is it by denying him the nomination now, or letting him lose on his own accord in November?
Okay, so you mentioned the electoral numbers and the electoral map. We've been looking at it a little bit. In a sort of normal world, it's very hard to imagine a path to 270 for Donald Trump. I don't know how closely you've looked at it. This week, we started hearing talk of we basically have a statistical dead heat in Pennsylvania. Do you think Trump is realistically going to put some more traditionally blue states in play? How likely, when you look at the electoral map, is a Trump path to victory, even hypothetically?
Well, hypothetically, he would need to win the lion's share of the Rust Belt and probably pick up Florida too, if he was actually going to pull it off. And that's a very high bar for him to reach when he has so little support from non-white voters, which you would certainly need in Florida. I mean, less so in the Rust Belt, but certainly in Florida. And if he doesn't get Florida, he's got to sweep the Rust Belt. You're talking from Minnesota to Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, which is extremely tall order. But you can find certain swing state polls. I think there's one where he's tied in Ohio, one where he's tied in Pennsylvania. But you could also find swing state polls where they're tied up in Utah and it's close in Mississippi. So there's a lot. The state polling is very sketchy right now, and state polling tends not to be done in a reliable, consistent way. And I wouldn't take any of that too seriously until we're at the post-convention period, because some of Hillary's numbers, I think, are still being weighed down by disgruntled Bernie Sanders supporters. That consolidation on the left has not fully happened yet, but it would seem they are moving towards that. Bernie is certainly winding down his attacks on her, talking about platform fights, not talking about denying her the nomination. The wild card, of course, is on the left is Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. She polled at 7% in the last CNN poll, but Gary Johnson polled 9%, and he's pulling some from the right. So far, that seems to be largely a wash when they are put together. Maybe a slight taking away of Hillary's margin, but Hillary's margin has been big enough in national polling that it hasn't actually changed the outcome.
All right, Bill Scher, you seem calmer than ever about this election. I don't know if it's because it's just June, but you seem completely unconcerned that Trump is realistically going to win this thing, which is great to see,
Well, he's not doing the things one would need to do. I mean, when the bank accounts are 42 million to 1, it's not. He's not in a strong position as things stand.
All right, Bill Scher, Campaign for America's Future, Politico. Always great to talk to you.
Thanks very much.